We've all seen unlimited tutorials on how to use compressor, about how to use the attack, release, threshold, ratio, and right now it's like you properly know how to use a compressor. But do you know you can use a lot of additional stuff in a compressor, especially in Logic stock compressor? You can even compress certain frequencies alone. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, then you have clicked the right video. In today's video, we're going to learn about all the additional stuff that you can do using the simple Logic stock compressor. I'm Florina Jain, otherwise known as Flojane.music, and I put out a lot of music production videos on Logic Pro. So if that's something you like, then you need to hit the subscribe button. So let's get started. So this is the basic Logic stock plugin. Now this is a platinum digital compressor, and we all know how to look at the meter, the graph, threshold, ratio, and all these things you see right in the middle of the compressor. If you still are struggling with how to use these knobs, I'll link a video on the screen and you can check that out. Today we're not going to look into all the usual stuff we talk about compressor. We're going to look at this right side vertical column. Not a lot of videos are available where people explain about how to use all these things. So I'm going to teach you exactly how to use these things. Let's first start with the limiter. So let's assume we have a signal like this. And I am getting a signal up to -6 dB. What does a limiter do? When you turn on a limiter and put a set amount of threshold, it doesn't allow anything beyond that threshold that you've set. And that's exactly what this button is also going to do. So I'm going to turn this limiter on and I'm going to set the threshold to be at -10. So you will not find any signal going beyond -10. So anything above -10 dB gets cut or it basically gets limited. That is the purpose of this limiter. So this might be useful when you're using a kick drum and you're trying to compress a kick drum, but it's too loud, so you can try using a limiter for that. Now moving on, you have a distortion knob over here. So whenever the signal goes past the threshold, it basically adds a certain amount of distortion to that signal. So is it a soft, a hard, or a clipping distortion? That can be set by using this knob. So actually it depends. So the tone that you get out of adding this distortion changes for each and every compressor type that is given over here. So for the platinum digital, it might have a particular tone, but for a vintage opto, it might have a different tone. It might have a tube kind of a distortion. So you can use this accordingly. Coming down to the mix dial, this is like the dry and the wet knobs you see on a reverb channel. When this is to the hard left, that is to the input, 100% of the dry signal is coming as the output. If it's to the hard right, 100% of the compressed signal comes to the output. And if it's somewhere in the middle, then you have a combination of both the dry and the compressed signal. So almost like a parallel compression. And then you have an output gain. So after the signal goes through all these settings, you can determine the output gain. So if you want it to be less or more, that's completely up to you. Now there is something that I want to share with you, and that is compressing certain frequencies alone. Isn't that interesting to hear? I'll tell you how to do that. Let's click this sidechain button. Now note that this sidechain is entirely different from the normal sidechain that you do over here. So why do you use the sidechain over here? Probably when you have a kick and a bass, when both of those tracks come, simultaneously, if you want to hear one properly with respect to the other, you use a sidechain. So you normally would sidechain the bass so that the kick will be heard prominently whenever you get the attack of the kick, right? But this sidechain is different. This doesn't lower the volume of another track, doesn't do that way. We're going to specifically focus on the high pass mode. Imagine you're having a compressor on the stereo out. That is the final place where all your tracks merge and come out. And you want to compress the final output. But unfortunately, when you're trying to do it, the kick is overpowering. And as a result, within a small threshold change, your compressor is starting to compress a lot. So you're like, okay, I don't want to compress the kick at this point. I just want to compress all the high frequencies and not touch the kick. That is when this particular knob comes into play. So what you can do is turn on this filter and go ahead and select the high pass mode. So what do we mean by high pass? You're passing only the high frequencies. So I can decide what frequencies I want to allow through the compressor, and the compressor will only focus on that and start to compress. So for example, I've selected the high pass. I didn't select what frequency. So you have a knob over here. So suppose I choose 130 Hertz, it means everything below 130 is cut and everything above 130 Hertz is passed, and only that is getting compressed. So let's see how that works. So you see the graph movement is very less when I've kept 2K, which means I'm just telling the compressor, start compressing any frequency that's above 2000 Hertz. Now let's see what happens when I continue to bring it down. So you saw that the graph is moving, right? So I'm basically allowing more frequencies to enter into the compressor so that the compressor can do its job. And naturally more signal gets compressed. So you have the liberty to choose the frequency that you want to compress as well. And not a lot of producers know this. So especially when you're trying to glue all the final tracks together by adding a compressor, this will be very handy. So if you want to omit some low frequencies and compress only the high frequencies, this is how you can do it. So I hope you learned something new about compressors and about using a compressor. Try this out in your tracks whenever you have multiple tracks going into a particular track. Try using a compressor over there and make sure you just compress certain frequencies and don't compress those low ends, because they might, additionally give more volume, in turn getting compressed more. Thank you so much for watching. Keep making music and I'll see you guys in another video.